Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Vinny Crypto from Prosum Solutions, and I am bringing you another YouTube video on one of my indicator and strategies called the price change scalping indicator and strategy. So what I plan on doing is give you a brief introduction of the indicator and strategy and also dive into how does it work. I've had a lot of numerous inquiries as to what the strategy does, and I'm hoping to solve that with this video. And then we'll take a look at the indicator and strategy settings so that you can get more familiar in how it will affect the performance of the indicator when you have it on your chart. All right. So with that, we will jump right into the desktop version of TradingView. And what I have here is I actually have the indicator loaded and configured in preparation for this video to demonstrate some of its features. And so I did that by adding it on there, and I've got a couple settings that I'm going to go ahead and show you real quick that I've got enabled in case you're wondering what these lines are. Once you do subscribe to it, you will find it in your invite-only scripts section of the indicators and strategies, and this is what it should be called, the price change scalping indicator. One is the study version or indicator version, and the other one is the strategy. And so once you add it on there, you definitely will see these two little emojis that distinguish the two. The one with the graph is the strategy, and the one with the little bell is considered the indicator. Okay, so what I had done here is I went ahead and loaded the indicator on this chart. It's PolyUSD on the 5-minute. And I've got some lines turned on here. So what I'm going to do is show you what I've got turned on. So I got the source line, which is in yellow here. Essentially, the source would be considered the close value on bars that complete. And so the orange line is drawing here using the close line. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is maybe increase the thickness there so you can see it. And the blue line happens to be this special price that's called the upper threshold price. Okay, and that's abbreviated here by UTP. So this is actually the upper threshold price, as you can see there in really thick color. Actually, I'm going to make them both really thick here so it really stands out. So the first thing you might be thinking to yourself is like, okay, what's going on here? Essentially, the price change scalping originated from a person that I came in contact with that lived in Brazil. And I really wish I could find his information because I would love to credit him this idea. But essentially, we worked together in developing this script, and it pretty much described his strategy. And essentially what it does is you configure the indicator for a particular source. So when I open up the settings here, you'll notice the very first input is the source, right? And right now I've got it set to the closing price. And so essentially what it does is this orange source line here is marking the close prices, right? But this upper threshold price is following along with the source value. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, why is it offset like this? Well, there's two special inputs that are found in these settings that control the offset of this threshold price. And the reason we call it the threshold is because once the price, the closing price, crosses over the threshold, we enter into a trade setup mode. Essentially, the price change indicator now is going to be looking to enter to scalp a particular trade. And so this indicator is designed to really be ran on a smaller time frame, typically anything 15 minutes or below. You will find that this indicator will perform really well. If you try to go above that, maybe 30, 45, you'll start to notice some diminishing type of performance. And so just be aware of that. I'm sure that if you tweak it some more, maybe you can get it to work. It's not particularly designed for that. It's really designed for really small movements and scalping really small trades. And so the two specific inputs that are controlling this offset of this threshold price is the number of bars offset as well as the upper threshold source. Now, the lower threshold source is only really applicable if you choose shorts only for the trading direction. But since at the moment we're doing longs only, then the upper threshold from the source is really what's taking effect. So these two together are essentially offsetting this source price. And so if you've noticed here, let me go ahead and turn off the candles for the Poly USD symbol. You'll probably notice essentially these two lines are essentially the same. It's just the blue line happens to be offset a little bit. And so what I've done here is I've got a drawing here just to kind of show you visually what it's doing here. So this particular measurement, I think this is the what's this called, the date and price change. I went ahead and added this in here. So what I'm doing here is I'm essentially focusing on this little corner right here, and it's essentially what it's doing is it's going up 0.5%, and then it's moving over 3 bars, which is pretty much the same as what's happening here. So we've got 0.5% as the upper threshold offset, as well as 3 bars, and that corresponds, and you can see here it's a little hard to read, so I apologize, but this little measurement tool is showing 0.5% and 3 bars offset. So essentially what it's doing is it's targeting this point right here. So it's as you observe these two lines, you'll notice that they pretty much match each other. It's just it's offset by these two different inputs. And so if I go ahead and hide this, you'll see how they basically correspond. So every little point right here is being mirrored, but with a special offset. So I'll go ahead and remove these two brush marks that I put in here. Okay, so that's essentially what the price change is doing. So by defining this upper threshold price, the indicator is waiting for the close price to cross above this threshold price. Sorry about that. I wanted to turn on the candles here. And so what I've got going on right here is I've got the replay mode going on here, because what I want to do is show you what it would do as price starts to move around, and once it crosses above, what the indicator is going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and step one more. So here we have essentially a price action that's actually heading higher now, and we may call this like, okay, it's starting to pump, right? So what the indicator is going to do is, like, once it notices that the source price is now crossing the upper threshold price, it's going to draw this little label with an L letter in it, indicating that it's now detecting a long setup. So this bar will need to complete in order for the setup to begin. So essentially it's detected it and it's noted it with the little label. Now if you don't want to see the label, oops, let me go ahead and turn that one off. If you don't want to see the label, you can definitely control that here. The which one is it called? It's called the upper threshold cross. It's using this little label right here, and it's noting it with the letter L. And so once it detects it, it needs the bar to complete. So once the bar completes, then the indicator is going to look at your settings and establish an entry price, because the expectation now is it's saying, okay, I'm going to now set up a long entry, and I'm going to offset my entry price at a specific percent. And the default value happens to be 0.5%, which is defined by here, enter trade at percentage from threshold. Right? And then, so I'll go ahead and play the next bar, and you will see right there, we now have this green line right here, which happens to be the entry price. So if I turn on my little measurement tool here, you'll notice that at the very top of this bar, it's going to begin measuring the offset in order to establish this entry price. So let me go into the settings here and make that line nice and thick so that it stands out. So NTR stands for enter. And so that's now going to be the entry price. So now the indicator is in a special mode, a trade setup mode. And one of the other settings that I've made available is, if you really are a visual person and like to see how this indicator is functioning and what mode it's in, I did make this one setting that you can find down here called show trade setup and in position background colors. So once I do this, it's a little hard to see. It's supposed to be a light green here, but let me see if I can make this a little, oh, it's blue. Let's see if I can do trade setup. Is this working? I'm not seeing anything. Orange. Yeah, that's the color. Let me try to see if I can make this interesting. It's supposed to be okay. Looks like that's the best it's going to do. All right. So now that it's entered in there as in trade setup mode, now it's going to essentially keep drawing this entry price line for every bar up to a specific number of bars. And that particular input you can find here in the settings, and it's called the maximum number of bars to enter a trade, and it happens to be 3. So if 3 bars elapse from the time that it started and it has not crossed the entry price, then essentially this trade setup has now been canceled, and it will continue monitoring for another setup condition just like this. So I've picked a point in time where I know the price is going to cross here, but I wanted to show you that now that we've established the entry price, we're going to be waiting 3 bars, a maximum of 3 bars for the price to enter. So here in this particular bar, the price did come back down, and so it's essentially hovering at this point. But if I play one more bar, you can see here it actually crossed the entry price, and once it did that, it went ahead and drew this little circle indicating to you, okay, I'm now in a position. Okay, and we do have, the indicator will draw a break-even price. Oops, I picked the wrong settings there. It will draw the break-even price, which you can kind of see right there. It's in gray, but what I'm going to do is make this nice and obvious. Let me pick, which color should I pick? Let me pick this pinkish color and nice and thick. So you can see that's the break-even price right there. And this break-even price is calculated using the commissions. Let's see, where is it at? The exchange entry commission and exit commission. So it's essentially looking at your commission values and preparing this price here, calculating it and saying, okay, if you really want to break even, this is your price point right here. And so I'm going to keep playing this. And so now you'll notice that we are in a position. You can see the break even continually drawing, but you'll notice that the entry price has terminated at the point of entry, so there's no point to keep drawing the entry line at this point. And then now we are starting to see all the different DCA layers kicking in that are configured there in those inputs, and I'll walk through those inputs here in just a moment. Oops, I still got my brush tool turned on. Let me turn that off. Let me delete these. There we go. And so you can see here the indicator will actually draw some labels at these prices, and these lines happen to be plot lines, so you'll see the prices there on the y-axis, and so you get up to 8. So with the entry would be considered sort of the base order, and then from there you've got the various levels being drawn here to essentially prepare a DCA in case you have a trend reversal and then the price starts falling down. You can start dollar cost averaging in and try to improve the probability of a successful exit. And so price will continue to flutter around. At this point, the source line and the upper threshold line really are not relevant at this point, but it's continuing drawing in case you want to just see how it looks throughout time. Oh, and one of the things I should make mention is, like, once you do have the entry occurring, then we obviously calculate the take profit, which is here, this orange line. And I've played it enough here now. You can actually see it cross the take profit and it's moved on. So essentially, we've just performed a small scalp within a small period of time. And so that in essentially is how the price change strategy is functioning. It basically is just using these 2 lines and trying to detect a crossover, and then setting up sort of an additional criteria saying, okay, if I can maintain this momentum of change in price, I'll go ahead and set like a stop entry limit order. And then once it crosses, the assumption is I'm now in a position, and from that point forward, we'll just set up the limit orders for DCAing in case you have a reversal, and then you can dollar cost average. Otherwise, the expectation is the change in price will just continue its momentum, and cross your take profit, and you've now successfully scalped a trade. And so at this time, I think it'll be good for us to just kind of dive in and look at the various inputs and the settings so you can better understand how they function. So at the very top, you obviously have the version input in case you ever are upgrading and you want to see what current version you're on compared to what's being released. You've got the price source input, and there's various different kinds. Essentially, you've got open, high, low, HL2, HLC3, and OHLC4. So you can pick any one of these. And so if I change to HLC3, obviously you'll see the change there occur on the chart. Switching back to close. Then you've got the threshold price from the source. You can control those here. You got the trade direction where you can go long or shorts. And with this particular general purpose indicator and strategy, you can even do both. So if you want to set it up where you're actually playing both sides, you can definitely do that where you want a long and short. You got the start date, trade start to date time, where you can establish that here, and that'll pretty much get you started to a specific point in time, especially for setting up automation scripts. You can definitely do that. We've already talked about these two, the enter trade at percent from threshold, as well as the maximum. Oh, actually, we didn't talk about this one. We talked about the maximum number of bars to enter trade. So the maximum entry percentage from threshold, essentially what you do here is, like, let's say it crosses, right, and we establish, let's just say that the price crosses the threshold and it continues to rise, and all of a sudden you have this really extreme pump occurring. If it gets to a maximum of 5%, so if it gets to a limit of 5%, essentially we're now saying, okay, this is my maximum. If for some reason in one single bar, when it crosses, if we go beyond 5%, I am no longer interested to enter into a position. I just want to cancel the trade altogether, because most likely the pump has taken place and it's now considered overbought in the small time frame that we're in, and I'm just going to pretty much I'm not interested in entering at that point. So you can obviously change this to your preference, or you can leave it at 0 and completely disable it altogether. If you disable the enter trade at percent from threshold, if you basically set this to 0, it will set the entry price one tick above the highest point of the bar that crossed over the threshold. So just be aware of that. And that's more to comply with the limitation on the emulator broker that you can experience excuse me, within TradingView, where I cannot set up a limit order in the same bar that I wanted to execute. So I have to offset it at least a minimum of one tick. And then you've got your take profit that you can specify here, your stop loss, the exchange entry, and exit commissions, so that way we can calculate the break even and also the take profit accordingly. 2% warning alert on percent loss from entry. So this is interesting because if you're wanting to set up an alert to alert you saying, hey, I am warning alert on percent loss from trade. So essentially, like, if you fall below 2% in the negative direction, like let's say you're in a drawdown of 2%, you can have this warn you. Obviously, it's set it to 2, but you can set it to anything you want, so that way you can have a special alert notification to send to you. We got the override minimum tick precision. So this came about in my experiences when I was using this indicator on various TradingView charts. Sometimes the minimum tick value that TradingView calculates for the symbol is not correct. And so I wrote these two inputs to essentially override that, so that my prices on the chart were actually matching the minimum precision that's on the exchange. So even though the minimum tick might be, and this is very rare, it's very rare that I've encountered this, but on the one times that I did, I had to program this because my automation was sending prices that were too precise, and so the exchange was rejecting them, saying, or actually, I think it was rounding them. So the exchange would receive the order, but it would just round it off. And so I started noticing a small drift in accuracy from the indicator to the actual events that are happening on the exchange, and so prices were off by a little bit. And so I ended up coding these two inputs to help me with that. Now, some exchanges have different inputs that are, or excuse me, different precision than this. So, for example, these are, as you can see, the different positions in the decimal places. But if you need something special, like I think Bybit on some of their markets, they have a precision of down to 50 cents, or actually not 50 cents. I think it's like a nickel. And so if you want to set up custom precision like that, you can. And then you can specify how to deal with the numbers that it's essentially taking off of the price precision. So you can either truncate, which simply removes those digits after the precision that you specify here, or do you want to round up? So you have that choice there. And then with the DCA dollar cost averaging section, this is the section that will set up your DCA layer lines. You've got an order size multiplier, so you can definitely increase the quote currency amount for each order that you're interested in. So you could. This is very similar to 3 commas volume scale. This verify price for limit orders, this is the same behavior as you find in the strategy version, where you can say how many ticks do I want to surpass the price in order to verify that the limit order was filled. And so you can specify that here. This actually was useful for me in some of my automation where I was noticing that I was getting partial limit orders being filled. And so what happens in TradingView is if this is not calculated, the price just simply has to be the same. So if for some reason the candle came down and the low value happened to be the same as layer 1 value, for example, then it would consider it as filled, right? And so then it would move on. But in reality, what I noticed on the exchange, like my limit order was partially filled or it wasn't filled. And so all of a sudden I was just like out of sync with the exchange. And so sometimes in my automation, I will set this to 1, meaning like I need the price to at least be 1 tick higher in order for me to guarantee that that limit order was filled. So this is something that you can consider if you're going to use this indicator for your automation. And then the layers, these are all relative to the entry price. So if you were to measure from this entry price here down here, that should be 2%. And then for layer 2, it'll be from the entry price down, it'll be 3%, 5%, and you can see here the various percentages I'm using. Now, this next section of inputs here, you can basically adjust the take profit when the layer has been crossed. And so this allows you to essentially say, well, you know, if I'm dealing, like let's say I'm dealing with a trade setup where I want to specify like 12%, if I've got a nice, you know, pump that's happening here, you can set it to 12. But if you start getting into your DCA layers, you might want to just say, well, I don't want it to be that high anymore. I actually am willing to lower my take profit a little bit in order to improve the probability of me to exit in success. And so you can definitely do that here. Alternatively, you can also increase too. So it doesn't have to be essentially lowering your take profit price, but it was just an example that I typically follow. Like if it gets down to like maybe beyond the 5th layer, this is typically where I start considering, okay, I might just want to, you know, reduce my take profit a little bit just to kind of improve the probability of exiting. And then as far as the enable trade eligibility condition, this allows you to really link this indicator with another indicator on the chart that can help filter out a long, okay? Or essentially tell this indicator, this is essentially when I want you to consider a long entry, as long as these conditions are true. In my experience, I found that the price change indicator, if you leave it as is, it has a tendency to buy at tops. So if for some reason you get a great run up where it just keeps buying, buying and exiting, it'll just keep doing that until price changes. And so once the price action sort of gets exhausted and then you start getting a downtrend, the indicator is not good at detecting those. And so typically what I like to do is I like to add on like an RSI type indicator to the chart, and configure it accordingly. Like, let's see, what do I have here? I have a 1 hour with gaps 7. Okay, let's just say we'll use this for example. So what you would do here is you would couple it with an RSI indicator. So here in this chart indicator data point, you would select RSI, right? So now we're essentially choosing this one indicator, and we're going to set up our conditions here. And we're going to say, okay, I want my long entry to be eligible as long as the indicator, the indicator data point is maybe less than a specific custom value of 50 or something like this. Let's see what happens here. And I have to check these on in order for it to be active. And so I happen to be in this replay mode, but essentially, since what I've done here is I pretty much set up these conditions so that it would always be true. But let me go ahead and change it. So let's see if we can get it to redraw under a new condition. So we'll say as long as it's maybe lower than 30. So if I set this to lower than 30, I'm hoping that it'll redraw the lines and not show this trade setup, because it looks like it's not going to accept it. Let me just go ahead and jump out of replay mode and then head back to my time frame. Where was I? Right here. I think that's where I was. No, that's not where I was. Let me see if I can find where my chart. Let me see if I can. There it is. Okay, this is where I was. Okay, so essentially what the indicator will do is if you choose to have a higher time frame, like on this RSI, like I chose for 1 hour, it's going to use the very last value that the RSI calculated at the 1 hour mark. So you'll notice if I put my cursor here on this particular bar, the RSI in the very right panel over here, if you look over here, it happens to be 2687. So that is definitely lower than 30. So therefore, these conditions were met, because once you get past this point, you'll notice that the RSI now reports as not available because it's still within that 1 hour period. So it's not giving you the real-time value. It's going to wait until the hour closes, and then you get a nice, I'm sorry, not nice, but you get the new RSI value. And so what I'm going to do is change it to like 25 and say it has to be lower than 25, and therefore it will be, the condition will not pass, and so you won't be able to see this trade setup being taken. So let me go ahead and set this to 25, and you'll notice here that this will redraw, and obviously the trade was not set up or not taken because the value was not lower than 25 on the RSI. But if I set this back to 30, it'll accept it. So this is very useful to help control the price change scalping indicator to help ensure that it's not buying when it's in an overbought condition. So consider using these trade eligibilities alongside the price change, and you can link it up to any particular indicator that can give you a plot series in the data window to be able to bind and link to. So, and then from this point forward, you have all the various any alert function call settings where you can actually turn on specific alerts or specific events and then be alerted by them when you create an alert. And then down at the bottom, you've got the chart settings. You got to show the source line, the threshold line. So if I uncheck this, the thresholds line will disappear. The source line, you can control the visibility on that. You can even turn off the label this when the source price is crossing over the threshold. If you don't want to see those, you can turn those off, as well as the break-even line. You can turn that off as well. Show stop loss line when DCA is enabled. You can also do this as long as it's enabled. You can always see it even when DCA is enabled. So you can show the trade setup and in position background colors. So if you don't want to see those, you can turn those off and as well as the layer numbering. The indicator also has a statistics table, and so by turning that on, you can see that here in the upper right corner, and it will just show you various statistics on the trade, as well as the layering that's experiencing crosses, like when orders are being filled, you can see their distribution. What it'll do is just count the total number of layers crossed, and then from there it'll show you the various distribution of how the layers were used. And this is very useful to help you to see how deep do you really need to go in your layering. Like in this particular configuration, I really don't need layers 6, 7, and 8 because I've never really hit them in this chart. And other things you can do is you can definitely use the replay to basically drop a time frame point there, and then you can see more history and see how the indicator performed further back in time. So let me just go ahead and show you how that works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick a time really far back in history on the 5-minute chart. It'll get me to the last available bar here, so you can see I can't go back any further. But if you want to go back further, you can definitely do that with this replay feature, where you select this and then drop your marker here, and what the chart will do is it'll now load in more history using that point in time as the endpoint. And so once you do that, then and obviously my indicator is not drawing here because I had fixed the start point to be 8:30, which was that very first bar. So what I'm going to do here is set this to like somewhere in the past, and then it'll draw up there. So this will definitely help you if you want to evaluate more history, because once you choose lower time frames, you don't get that much history. And so it's really helpful to use this replay feature to load up more history and evaluate its performance in, you know, price action that occurred in the history. So I'll go ahead and turn this off. The strategy version is pretty much the same as the indicator version. One of the distinct differences that you'll notice, you do have this the entry order size unit. So this is helpful to set up your orders and determine, like, okay, what's your first order going to start with. And in this particular situation, you can see here it's 2.74506, and that's percent of my equity, which happens to be my initial capital, which I have at 10,000. And so I've actually developed a spreadsheet that helps me figure out what's a good value to put in here. So in this particular case, I think I'm running an order size multiplier 1.33, and my initial capital happens to be 10,000. And so with those two different inputs, I can specify how many layers I have. And in this spreadsheet, you can reduce the layers by simply selecting the layers and deleting them, or you can just simply drag to add more, and then you would just have to, you know, drag the columns and have them autofill. So that, because if you look at the actual formulas, they are relative, and they will calculate when you start spreading them out into new rows, and so it'll autofill and adjust accordingly. So in this particular one, I do have 9 layers, because even though it says 8 here, you got to consider that your entry order happens to be a specific layer. So this one would be considered your entry order, and then this one would be considered layer 1, and so forth, all the way down to 9. Since I've got the 8th layer here filled, I'm now using up 9 layers in this particular indicator. And so the value 2.74506 I got from this spreadsheet right here, and I placed it here. So that way I'm essentially compounding here. So as new trades are developing or being formed, the indicator will assume that we're compounding from our previous earnings, and so it'll always keep track of that and continue setting up new trades that way. And so what other things are available in the strategy version? That's pretty much it. Obviously, you won't have the alert section. That's probably the other difference. So there is no alert, any function call or any alert function call settings section in this one. So the strategy is strictly meant for back testing, whereas the indicator is specifically designed for setting up alerts and notifications in case you want to use it in some kind of automated trading platform. I think that pretty much covers all of the settings. One thing to also make clear that's different with the strategy version is that the order size input here is not being used by the indicator because it's being overwritten by what you supply here. And the reason for that is because in PineScript, which is the language for coding indicators, it doesn't make available these inputs to be read in. So I can define the default values for these inputs, but I can't get the new value if you happen to change them. And so because of that, I end up replicating those inputs here. So therefore, these aren't really being used at all. And so the commissions is being used for the strategy, so definitely set that there. And also set the commissions here just so that it can calculate your stop loss and take profit lines or prices accordingly. And so with that, that pretty much describes the price change scalping indicator and strategy. And so if there are any questions, you're more than welcome to hit me up on my website and also in my Discord. And hopefully this makes clear how the price change indicator and strategy works. And I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for stopping by.